I sold 2 million records, still ain't recouped.
Honestly, I've never gotten a streaming check.
Lawyers' reaction to why the music industry is dying, the infamous 360 deal. Everything that you end up earning, they get a little piece of that, whether they helped with it or not. I think the facade of the music industry seems to be dying more than maybe the music industry itself. What do you guys think about that? Hey fam, welcome back. I'm top music attorney, Miss Krystle. Is the music industry dying? I'm gonna give you a lawyer's reaction, but specifically, I'm someone who has played music since I was 4. I learned classical, piano, I did violin and cello, and I moved on to singing. I still make music today as an independent artist, and I've been lawyering now for over 10 years. So I'm very invested on giving you my perspective, and I'll give you my lawyer's reaction to why the music industry is dying. Let's jump into it.
The music industry is officially on its way to the bottom as over 150 employees and one of the biggest major labels in the industry got laid off, and a whole host of artists have also been getting dropped. This marks a very important time in music as there's currently a very big shift taking place, mostly in relation to the documented plateau of revenue from streaming, something that does affect the entire industry as a whole. Atlantic Records, which is the home label to some of the biggest stars in music, recently reported that they're downsizing as a part of a major restructuring effort. It was reported that over 170 people working at the major label got laid off. This includes people in the management sector, people from the marketing department, and a whole lot of the employees put in positions to make the artist win. A lot of musicians are also suffering in the process. If you're not aware, a whole lot of artists have also been getting dropped from the label. The names of those artists are not known yet, but let's just say that these record labels sign thousands of new artists every single year, knowing that 95% of them are not going to succeed.
So we covered this. Atlantic is firing left, right, and center. Why? But in addition to firing staff, they're also letting artists out of their contracts, right? For me, I just go, well, what we see a lot of labels do is that when they are not actively working an artist's catalog or asking the artist to release new music, they shelve the artist. And so I go, it's not the worst thing to be basically let go of your contract, to have your contract voided. So it does mean that the artist sometimes has to start over, but being in a position where a label says, hey, we don't think we can do something for you, we're moving on, is different than a label saying, hey, you are contractually tied to us and we're also not going to do anything to further your music career right now because there's maybe not a lot of interest in your project.
Leaves them with a very small pool of winners, and they're banking all their money on that small percentage of artists breaking even, and an even smaller percentage out of those coming out on top and becoming big names and successful names that makes them a lot of money. There's also been a wave of music executives stepping down from their respective positions. Kevin Liles, CEO of 300 Entertainment, which is the home to Young Thug and Fetty Wap, stepped down after working at the label for over a decade. Julie Greenwald, chairman of Atlantic Records, is also stepping down in January. This may not seem all that major to most people, but it actually is. We're seeing a very interesting shift taking place right now because streaming has undoubtedly dominated the music industry for the last decade. Music streaming was introduced in the early 2000s with Napster, which is an American peer-to-peer file sharing application primarily associated with digital audio file distribution that originally launched on June 1st, 1999. With the launch of Spotify in 2008 is when it became a staple in the music business. It's been the dominant source of income for the music industry since the mid-late 2010s, and it's overtaken physical sales and digital downloads as the primary revenue driver.
We can speculate on where record labels are primarily making their money, because I'm actually saying that labels are not making the kind of money that they want to be making from streaming, obviously. And so conversely, what they're doing is that they go, look, we're going to invest in the big hitters because, to his point, we will have the small artists that we're kind of, gambling on. We're hoping one of them is going to make it big. And then when one does, great, we're going to put all money into that. And so it is a gamble for labels. That is where we have to look at this and be like, these are just businesses. They are trying to figure out from money that goes out, what money then comes back in. And for a lot of records, they're coming up with very creative ways to make money, including suing other businesses that they can assert copyright infringement claims against, and then they get statutory damages up to $150,000 per infringement. And so all of a sudden they have these juicy claims for $200 million, for $600 million. Instead of worrying about, let's say, the $500 or the $5,000 that they're not getting through streaming or sales or digital download sales.
That's been the case for a while, but it does look like the streaming revenue growth in the music industry is appearing to slow down. Although it has grown steadily for years, recent trends suggest that the rapid expansion seen in previous years is now tapering off. As an example, Sony Music reported a modest growth in its streaming revenue in the second quarter of 2024, which is lower than expected compared to previous years. So things objectively aren't as good as they used to be. When a lot of people think about inflation, they think about the effect it's having on their everyday lives, which is understandable because that's the only thing we know. But I want you to realize that this concept applies to the music business as well. We're talking increased touring costs, which is where artists make the majority of their money. This includes rising fuel prices, venue rental fees, and labor costs.
Let me put that out to the rest of you who are watching this right now. For all of the many artists and music producers in my community who stumbled across this video, drop a comment right now. Is what he said correct? Is the majority of the money that you make from touring?
This has made touring significantly more expensive. Artists are finding it harder to profit from live performances, which is why so many musicians are not only canceling but also scaling back on touring. This is of course connected to the consumer, because if it's more expensive to tour for an artist, that obviously drives up the prices they set on things like tickets. So the consumers are facing higher ticket prices as these costs are passed on, factoring in the increased price of raw materials for physical products like vinyls and higher shipping costs, which is impacting the distribution of physical media. This of course puts immense pressure on profit margins for the record labels, because if their artists aren't making as much money, that affects their bottom line. Inflation is driving up costs across the board in the music industry, from live performances to physical product production, while also potentially reducing consumer spending power. And since so many people in general are struggling financially, and inflation is putting such pressure on household budgets overall, the consumer is going to prioritize essential goods over discretionary spending, like concert tickets, merchandise, and music subscriptions.
I understand that. I'm hard pressed to find people who will not find room in their budgets for the things that they love. Experiences, maybe it's that cup of coffee, the $2, the $3, the $6, I don't know what kind of coffee you get, but there are things that people will make room in their budgets for. And we see that with like Tyler, the Creator, and doing his rollout where he is doing direct to fans, and he is bundling, and he is so well utilizing the audience that he has. But you see artists at all kinds of levels. It's not just Tyler, the Creators, who are obviously huge artists, but ones who are focusing on monetizing by making low-cost things available to their fans.
Overall, less money is being put into the music industry due to the lack of consumer spending, and the creation of the music in itself is actually a very costly aspect of the process. Most industry artists aren't do-it-yourself musicians because they don't write, record, produce, mix, and release out of their bedroom. In that case, why would they sign to a major label?
Like to drink and smoke some Doja, and I feel like smoking platinum. Yeah!
So unless you fall under the category of someone like Russ, who does everything in-house, as soon as you enter the industry, you're going to pay industry prices just to create the art. This is something Florida singer and songwriter Money Long.
I agree with that. I absolutely agree with that. I think that you need to be able to control costs. You know, we saw Ari Lennox and, you know, just her distress and her finally just calling out her label on social media and just being like, you guys aren't paying to promote my recent release. I find it so embarrassing. I'm so fed up. And I just go back to trying to mobilize ourselves and kind of DIYers to learn how to do these things ourselves so that we can keep costs down, so we can hire internally and not have to rely on, let's say, another label, another company who will set their own pricing, a bill of which you're going to owe and that the label's going to reimburse itself on based on your royalties.
Money Long has for a long time been a successful writer in the music business, but during her rise as an artist after a hit song, Hours and Hours, blew up, she spoke about some of the things she realized about how expensive it can be just to record music.
I gotta mix it, that's money per song. Now that's 14 songs on this album. The last album was 19. So studios typically for a 12-hour block is $1,200. Then the session engineer is $75 to $100 an hour. So just add that up. Say you do 7 sessions a week, $10,000 just on sessions. And then mixing anywhere from $2,500 to $10,000 a track. That's 19 tracks. So that's $100,000. And now you gotta pay for the beats. So they're anywhere from $5,000 to $40,000 a track, depending on who you're working with. And sometimes there's multiple producers, so you gotta pay this fee, this fee, this fee, this fee. I didn't realize how much money that it takes to actually be an artist. This is before you market, this is before you shoot a video, this is before you do an appearance.
This is why a lot of your favorite artists in the industry are actually struggling, believe it or not. A lot of artists are surviving off of the advance money they receive from the record labels. And that money, which is a loan, of course has to be paid back through your record sales. Every aspect of the process, whether it's music videos, marketing, securing features, first-class flights has to be recouped by the label. But what happens when people aren't streaming your records and you sign the infamous 360 deal, which allows the label to essentially eat off of all your income streams? You have a situation where you get stuck in the recoupment phase for an eternity, which is another way of staying in debt.
Well, there's two things that he just said. The infamous 360 deal, it's not really called a 360 deal anymore. It's just a recording agreement. The recording agreement, there's going to be ancillary rights built in. So basically, there's going to be a provision that says, oh yeah, by the way, in addition to your recording commitment, the advance we're paying you, we get to recoup first, which it always is gonna say, okay? Typically, there's gonna be language that says also for your other entertainment activities related to your entertainment career, which could be anything. Your acting, your book writing, you doing advertisements. We as the label get a little piece of that. And that little piece could be 10%. I've seen up to 35%, which is above and beyond what I think is reasonable. So what used to be called the 360 deal, meaning the label's helping you with the music, but they get 360 of everything that you end up earning. They get a little piece of that, whether they helped with it or not. And so they don't call it a 360 deal anymore. They just call it a recording agreement, and they put in these sections in the contract that are called ancillary rights. So again, saying we as a record label get a little piece of the pie of everything that you do.
Rapper Fat Joe, who a lot of people will recognize from the song Lean Back, spoke about how an album he dropped over 20 years ago that sold over 2 million records still has him in a place till this day where he owes his previous label money.
Scientist who wins the Nobel Peace Prize to do the accounting on major labels' math, and they always can't figure it out. And so it's robbery all the way through. And you sing your life, your pain, your this, that, and they own your shit. So that's why I say it's a Ponzi scheme. I sold 2 million records, still ain't recouped. I have an album, Jose sold 2 million records. When I get my statement from the major label 20 years later, I still owe them money. I put out an album independently on Empire and get distribution. My album might sell 250, 300,000 records. I make millions of dollars off of it.
We recently covered how Limp Bizkit is suing its record label Universal and saying that Universal has never paid Limp Bizkit a single royalty. Ever. And then, upon further accounting and logging in and all this stuff, there was an amount that was due and owing. And so now they're just alleging that there was a significant underpayment. But basically, these labels, they say, we're doing your advertisement, we're paying for your music videos and your studio time, and we're fronting all of the costs, which takes millions and millions of dollars if you are a band like Limp Bizkit, for example. And so they go, we basically are unrecouped. We never were able to make back our money from the music, and so we have to just speculate and be like, does that sound accurate? So to Fat Joe's point, 2 million records, 20 years later, apparently he is still not recouped, according to his label.
Method Man, which is another legacy act in hip-hop, revealed this year that he's never received a single check from streaming in his career.
Honestly, I've never gotten a streaming check for any of my music. I've never gotten a streaming check for any of my music. Like I said, I'm still trying to figure it all out.
Which is insane to even think about. So even the older artists who've been around
crazy.
for some time don't have it figured out the way you think they do. The reality is, people are just not buying albums like they used to. And since the monetary payouts to individual artists is extremely low, this is a very unsustainable model set in place, which is leaving many musicians financially vulnerable in 2024. Artists are not only dependent on touring and merchandise sales, which is becoming more costly for the consumer, a lot of artists on these major labels are also facing continuous pressure to release content in the form of music and digital content without seeing a substantial increase in royalties. The record labels are far more focused on short-term streaming trends, and this hit-driven market makes it harder for artists to build long-lasting careers. These layoffs and cuts in artist rosters also means less support for musicians in terms of promotion and A&R development, and that's leading to the artists shouldering more of the financial and marketing budget themselves, which is the entire point of signing to a record label. You're gambling on other people's money with the help of this infrastructure that's supposed to propel your name beyond ways you could do it yourself. What happens when half the building that was championing your artistry gets dropped overnight and you're now left to fend for yourself?
I mean, he made a really good point. He's like, if you're going to sign to a record label, he didn't say this, which is, if you're going to sign to a record label, give them ownership of your music. You're banking on someone else's money. You are gambling with someone else's money. So, right, the risk is really low because you know what? If nothing happens, they take the hit. It's not money out of your own pocket. So my challenge is always, well, if you do believe in yourself and you're willing to build yourself like a real music business, then okay. Why couldn't you just go take out a loan? Do it yourself, but retain ownership of your music. And so that if and when you do win and you sell 2 million records, you get all of the upside. And so you have to gamble and take that risk on yourself. If you are someone that is needing help in the music business, at the end of this video, you can check out topmusicattorney.com. I have courses, I have free stuff just to kind of get you started. If you do want to deep dive, if you do want to train with me, I always say go through my music business program, which is how to think like a record label, become a record label. And then if you do want to get into touch with me or one of my lawyers, we got you covered.
Truth is, a lot of artists in the industry are coming to terms with the fact that everything is truly not what it seems. Prince did, after all, call record contracts another form of slavery. This is something he realized after the battle for his master recordings, which led to him changing his name to a symbol in the 90s as a form of protest against his record label, Warner Bros. Tupac is another good example of this conversation, because Tupac wasn't as rich as you would think he was looking from the outside. After his death, Pac's family discovered that he was millions of dollars in debt to his record label, Death Row Records. Not only that, but the house that he had supposedly purchased before his passing wasn't even in his name.
I discovered he had next to zero, next to nothing. I discovered that the home that he had thought that he had just bought was not his.
Afeni Shakur says her son deserved a lot more than he ended up with.
I say that the entertainment business is a business of prostitution and thievery, and that was rampant around my son's talent, you know.
Something that I've seen, a little less common, but you know, when we're working with partners or labels who are, let's say, based in another country, such as in Mexico, Mexico's standard recording agreement, there is ownership of the actual trademarks. You see that more often, that the label is taking ownership of an artist's name. That's way more aggressive than we typically will see with US recording agreements. My understanding is with the Prince situation, the name change had to do with the ownership of the music, whereas sometimes there's a name change that has to happen because someone else ends up owning your name because it was in the contract that you signed, that you didn't get a lawyer to review, to protect you. It's crazy what I've seen over a very long time doing this as a music lawyer.
Truth is that Tupac got stuck in the recoupment phase because the lifestyle he was living was fueled by the millions of dollars his label was fronting him, which was a necessity for him due to the fact that his career was filled with a whole host of legal troubles that he was constantly fighting with that money, and all those expensive video shoots weren't going to be paid by themselves, so the costs were racking up, and the ugly discovery made by his mother led to immense disappointment as she realized her son didn't have a lot of money to his name to begin with. These stories are not uncommon, as a lot of artists are in a perpetual state of debt to their record labels, something that doesn't get discovered by the majority until the minority decide to hire an independent lawyer with no ties to the music industry for an audit. Rapper Chamillionaire is a great example of this. Chamillionaire is a 44-year-old rapper born in Washington, D.C., raised in Houston, Texas, who found success in the rap industry in the mid-2000s with the song Riding. Chamillionaire rode that high for a few years, but ended up having other aspirations that didn't involve just being a rapper. Later in life, with the rap money he had acquired, Chamillionaire became a serial investor and entrepreneur who now has an estimated net worth of $50 million. Chamillionaire, during his rise as a rapper, started connecting the dots in regards to how the music industry actually works. Just like a lot of artists in the end do, he realized that he was simply getting ripped off and managed to get out of his contract with Sony. Before he did that, however, Chamillionaire discovered $600,000 that was hidden by his record label, and that only happened after he hired a lawyer that did an audit of his financials in relation to the label.
When it comes to financial audits, they're so expensive. This is always the problem too. We go to, ask for accounting, and sometimes we can get things back on track with just a demand letter, and other times the label will clam up, and so we need to actually utilize the language that are in your contracts that say we have the right to look at your books. But that means we have to go hire someone. So we hire a certified public accountant to go and do these audits. They're very time intensive. They're very expensive. On average, it's usually the artists who are making some kind of money who can then go and pay for this kind of thing, only to discover that there was some kind of underpayment. So we get the money, we get the accounting, we get the audit costs reimbursed, but all of that is such an impediment to someone getting what is rightfully owed to them under a contract.
When the check gets handed to an artist, the check is normally not right. The first person that told me this was Nelly. Nelly told me, you gotta learn how to do this thing called an audit. And I was like, what is that? And then he was like, man, you gotta get a lawyer. And so I searched, I found Jay-Z's auditor, right? So he goes and he finds over $600,000 that the label hid from me. So I was like, wait a second, is this the way it always is? He's like, yeah, you got to keep on doing this.
Millionaire is one of the rare cases in music of someone who ended up coming out on top in the end, because that's not usually how things go. A lot of artists have sadly been sold a lie of fortune, not realizing that it all does come at a cost that sometimes is too late to come back from. Luckily, with the abundance of information in this day and age, and people like me and other platforms speaking on this, I think there will be a rise in the truth prevailing, because believe it or not, the majority of people still don't know any of these things I talked about in relation to the music business. The lies have been marketed at such a big scale, it's became the truth to the masses, and it's due to both the public and the musician being uninformed that the corporations are able to keep making their money, because the music industry is a revolving door. For every artist that gets dropped, there's 10 more that get signed at the same time, and statistically 80% of them have no clue what's waiting on the other side. Even the ones who are in the knowing end up getting.
Except for those of you who follow Top Music Attorney, you don't have to wait until you actually have something that is going viral, something someone's offering to buy something, one of your digital assets. You don't have to wait till then. You learn now. You take the time to invest in yourself now, and you realize how you can actually make this money yourself, and you don't have to rely on a third party. That's the whole premise of everything we talk about. Become your own record label, meaning think like a record label, do things like a record label, but do it for yourself. I think the facade of the music industry seems to be dying more than maybe the music industry itself. What do you guys think about that? Drop a comment down below.
Even though the business of music will never die, the industry aspect is in fact dying, because the industry is based on a lie and an illusion and a skewed perception of what it means to make it. The glass is getting shattered as we speak, the rooms are emptying themselves out, the queue to the entrance is getting shorter, and let's just say that the party is in fact dying.
All right, so recap. I thought that video was well put together, so kudos to BlackySpeaks. The framework of the music industry, which is music is just the asset. It is the thing that sells. We build brands around it. We build tours around it. We get merch. It is the thing that ancillarily, everything around it is then able to be exploited. So this is the framework that I need you to think of your own career, your own music, and what are you doing? How are you able to go and monetize what you were doing right away through your own website, through your own email list, by going direct to fans and intentionally trying to take out these middlemen. If you don't need a label, great. Sometimes signing with a label is the mission. It's what you want to do. Great. If you want to do that, it's just know what you're walking into, okay? And also what you're giving up in exchange for quite literally, potentially nothing. And then equally just considering what the goal is for you. It is extremely difficult to make someone a star and to keep them a star. And we can all, I think, fairly agree to that. For the kind of money that has to be paid by, let's say, a label like Universal for advertising, for studio, there is a ton of money that actually does go out, which then puts artists in this position to be potentially unrecouped. And then there might be spaghetti accounting that is happening. And so then also on top of all of the waste is fraud. I'm not saying that's always the case, but sometimes that is the case. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you guys on the next one. I'm Top Music Attorney.